Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be going through our rookie quarterback dynasty rankings before the 2025 NFL Draft.
Hike!
In this episode, you're going to get Joe and my rookie quarterback dynasty rankings. We're going to be going through 10 guys, going from tier 1 to tier 5. Starting off in tier 1, Joe, who is in tier 1 for you?
Yeah, in tier 1, I just got one guy, and that's going to be Cam Ward.
All right. Well, so far, you and I have been drinking the same tea or whatever drink we've been drinking, the same drink here. I also have Cam Ward as the only quarterback in tier number 1. Now, I am very curious to get your thoughts on Cam Ward because based on his playing style, I feel like you don't typically like what he does. I mean, he's not Caleb Williams, but
Right.
he kind of has that, which I typically have the flair for the dramatic, where he's kind of out of structure, kind of that playmaking ability. So I'm kind of curious what's your overall evaluation of Cam Ward?
Yeah, you're not wrong. I'm not a big fan of that type of style and the more ad-lib style and kind of the more so like out of the framework of what the play calls for. But after, doing some digging and looking up on him, I do see like he does have the ability to, he has that ability to process plays. He's got the play recognition. He also has the ability to read the defense as well. And if you look at some of his throws, I mean, he's able to really put the ball in some tight windows as well. And just, his overall production, last year, I mean, he had 4,313 passing yards and then, 39-7 touchdown interception ratio as well. And then as far as the fantasy upside, he doesn't run a ton, but he does also have some rushing ability as well.
Yeah, and that 39 touchdowns passing led the NCAA in 2024. So, that's a pretty impressive mark, especially transferring from Washington State, with it being his first year in the Miami, Florida system. For him to be able to do that, I thought was pretty impressive. He's got a good size. He's 6'2", 223. I have to say I am somewhat surprised, and I honestly don't really understand if this is true. It seems like all the reports seem to indicate this, why the Titans are so interested in Cam Ward, because I don't know if you saw some of his tape, but there were times where he literally was throwing across his body and some really just gnarly interceptions. Like they looked really, really bad. And I'm like, you have Will Levis, and Will Levis does this type of stuff. So why would you want someone like him? Like in some ways, like Will Levis, I think, honestly, I think he'd be better off if he went somewhere else and got a fresh start. I think he has some potential himself. I don't know if he's really necessarily gotten a fair shake. I just think I don't know if you agree with me, but it kind of is perplexing to me. Maybe it's the person, I mean, obviously based on his leadership style and just who Cam is compared to Will Levis. I don't know, but it's kind of a head scratcher to me. I don't think he's worth the number 1 overall pick. I really don't. I think, is he a first round quarterback? Yeah, I mean, I could say a mid-late first rounder. I think I'd be okay with that, but I don't think he's the 101. I don't think he's the 101 or the first round pick.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with that. I mean, he's definitely, in most years, he would not be the 101, but it just so happens that this quarterback class is what it is. It's not the best. It's a far cry from last year. And at the end of the day, I mean, there's quarterback needy teams out there, and teams are always going to reach to try to get a franchise quarterback. And the Titans are in that situation. They're in the situation of desperation, and they did take their shot, and they're banking on not having, the number 1 pick in future years. So while you got the number 1 pick, they're going to shoot their shot on Cam Ward. And, as far as some of those throws, I mean, that is kind of one of his weaknesses, is just that he's always his, inability to give up on a play. He always thinks he can kind of make that play, and he knows he's got that big, strong arm. And you're right. He does kind of go across his body like that and throw in some dangerous plays. But, at the same time, it's just something that needs to be coached out of him. And a lot of the young quarterbacks do that quite a bit. And I mean, that's always a big no-no in the NFL for young quarterbacks, is you never throw across your body and throw it late across the middle of the field.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, obviously with this episode, we're talking about it from a dynasty, framework here. I think he's the only one that has a true ceiling that you're talking about maybe he becomes I don't know if he'll ever be a QB1, tier 1 level, but at least tier 2, tier 3, he could maybe be in the conversation. Those other guys, I think they have less of a shot of making it. I think he has the best by a good margin, and so that's why I felt like he was a standalone in tier 1.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, most people just say he's the guy and the number one guy, and I think just that's partially why I got him and just in a tier of his own too.
All right, so far we're on the same page. Let's head over to tier 2. Who do you have there?
And tier 2, I've got Jackson Dart, and then at number 3, I've got Shador Sanders. Number 4, I've got Tyler Shuck.
Okay, so 2 is Dart.
Yeah, 2 is
Okay.
Dart. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, at number 2, I've got Jackson Dart as well, and then number 3, Shador Sanders, and that's it for me. Just those 2 guys in tier 2. So you and I both have Dart ahead of Shador Sanders, which is really interesting. And for the record, I know we recently did a Superflex mock. We talked about where Shador Sanders went with the Giants. In this episode, Joe and I really did a deep dive into this class, really got prepared. And as I did more and more research and as I looked more into this, I really felt that Dart's a better prospect. And I think he looks like you think the same.
Yeah. I mean, he might not be the better NFL prospect because I think in terms of NFL, I think Shador Sanders is really NFL ready and he's already playing an NFL system. And I think just his processing speed is probably the best of the class. But he's just a primary pocket passer, and that really limits his upside for fantasy. Where you got a guy like Jackson Dart who's got that rushing upside. He also is a good processor and can read defenses and make the throws. So with that rushing upside, that's the reason he's at 2 over a guy like Shador Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, here's a couple of reasons for me in comparing the two, right? You've got Jackson Dart who can make those off-platform throws. I typically, for me, I
don't
like
care
to
about
see.
that.
I know you don't. I like to see that because, especially with the creativity that we see in defenses nowadays, you need to get beyond just traditional quarterback play. To me, you've got to be able to show some flair. He has that. Now, he is mobile. I wouldn't say he's necessarily a dual threat quarterback, but he's more mobile than Shador Sanders. And what I really like about him is that I saw this from Pro Football Focus that he led the FBS with 1,517 pass yards with 17 touchdowns on deep passes. So that's passes that were 20 plus air yards or more. So, and I believe he had the highest ADOT as well as far as the throws down the field. This is not a guy who just checks it down. You look at Shador Sanders, a lot of the plays. I think he led of this draft class here. He led the quarterbacks in the amount of screen passes that were in the offense. So, to me, I like a quarterback that's able to throw down the field. You are right. I mean, Colorado's not a pro style offense. It's more of a spread, but it's a better offense than Lane Kiffin's offense, who he has a bunch different components that do not translate per se to the NFL game. So there are some things that benefit Shador. I just think at the end of the day, like you said, he's got the decision making, he's got the accuracy. He led the FBS with 74% completion percentage. That's what you get from him. But the thing that I really like, this is my big thing I want to point out here, and I'll let you talk here. Jackson Dart extends plays. Shador Sanders is not an athletic guy. You would think Deion Sanders is his dad. He was so athletic. You would think Shador Sanders is athletic. He's not that athletic. He's getting chased down by Pac-12 players, and it's going to be even worse in the NFL. And he takes egregious sacks. I think he thinks he's like a Caleb Williams type who can extend plays. Now, you could say it's the Colorado offensive line. We'll find out. But there were some things that he purposely kept. He kept the play alive when he should have just, chose not to, in my opinion.
Sure. But I think also the offensive line also contributes to the fact that they did so many screen passes and quick passes, and it was almost out of a necessity. True. I mean, their offensive line was just absolutely putrid the 2 years, with Colorado there. But But that's the thing. That's the one knock on Shador Sanders is everyone just says they checked it down a ton and so many plays near the line of scrimmage. But I think he does have some ability, but he just is that pocket passer, and that limits his upside for Dynasty. And that's why I said I think he's better fit. Like if we were talking about where NFL draft quarterbacks and just how I think they perform, I might even have like Shador number 1 in terms of that.
Well, even Dart has a bigger arm. So to me,
Yeah.
it's where I don't think Shedeur Sanders has that big of an arm. He has great accuracy, but I'm looking for the ceiling here. If I'm going to be drafting a quarterback in one of my dynasty leagues, I want someone to be. I see Shedeur Sanders as you hope he's like a Geno Smith type. Now mind you, the Geno Smith now in Seattle, not in his early days. But I think he can be that. I don't know. He's not all that exciting to me. I can see what you're saying where you think he could be the best NFL prospect, but I don't think anyone's going to light the world on fire, any of these guys, really.
No, and that's the thing. Yeah, I don't know if any of these guys are. I mean, sure, some of them look interesting. And no surprise, you like Jackson Dart. He makes all the flashy plays for you. And people have called him a bit of a kind of compared him to Josh Allen, just smaller in terms of his play style and his ability to run. But I mean, just not as big, obviously.
I honestly was tempted to put Dart over even Cam Ward, but I
thought about it.
Really? You too?
Well, just because, I mean, from the dynasty perspective, I mean, if there's any like type of dual threat guy, it's really him, and that gives you that rushing upside that you'd like to see. And a lot of times the top quarterbacks in fantasy football are the guys that provide that rushing upside. And yeah, Cam Ward can run, he just doesn't a ton, like I said, but he has had like 300-yard rushing seasons. But we're talking about Jackson Dart, who had over 100 carries while he was at Ole Miss.
It'll be really interesting. This is where we're doing this pre-landing spot, and you and I put a lot of emphasis on the landing spot and how this will all shake out. If Jackson Dart becomes a first-round pick, I'll be really curious what the Steelers do and if they pass on him, because you've got two guys in George Pickens and DK Metcalf who can stretch the field, who I think could really, when you have a guy like Jackson Dart, he actually would benefit having a guy like him at the quarterback position. And if Aaron Rodgers doesn't go there or is kind of still playing this, yo-yo game that he's playing with them, I don't know. It'd be really interesting.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I mean, in terms and that's kind of the benefit sometimes of these guys slipping into the 20s as you actually go to a decent team versus, getting taken in the top 5 and you go to the slop.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if Shedeur Sanders is also available too. I know they're talking about him possibly falling. I don't know. To me, we'll find out what happens to him, but I wouldn't be shocked.
I wouldn't be shocked either. I mean, I know people are saying, there's definitely a chance. If there's one of the quarterbacks that do slip, it would be Shedeur.
I do wonder if he wasn't Deion Sanders' son, if he wouldn't be getting as much buzz as he is, to be honest with you. But, I mean, NFL teams shouldn't care about that. But at least from the media cycle and people talking about him, we'll find out on draft day if teams actually hold him in such high regard that we're hearing, in the media circle right now.
Yeah, I think when they get a chance to interview him, though, I've heard from like Ian Rappaport, he was on Pat McAfee's show the other day, and he got to actually talk to him one-on-one. Deion said, or he had talked to Deion and said he wanted to talk to Shedeur, and Deion just handed him the phone, and he just said he was like, really intelligent guy and very smart player, and kind of really knows a lot, and he was really impressed by the one-on-one interview we had with him, and I'm sure that could impress other NFL teams, and maybe that helps his draft stack other than his play on the field.
All right, so before we head over to tier 3, sorry, I got ahead of myself. You had Tyler Shough in this tier, so you thought that he was at the same caliber as Jackson Dart and Shedeur Sanders. Why?
Yeah, I just think if there's anybody that's ready to just come in and play, I don't know if he'll get a shot to play right away, probably not, but he's just played so much football, and I think if he did get a chance, he'd be ready to just go in there and produce. And I mean, this last year at Louisville, he had 3,195 yards, 23 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So again, he's a guy that kind of takes care of the ball. And we'll see what happens with him. But I think if he were to get a chance, like he'd have a pretty good rookie year just because he has so much experience.
I'll hold off on talking about him. I'll be talking about him later, so we can kind of go back and forth there.
Sure.
Let's head over to tier number 3. Who do you got there?
And tier 3 at number 5, I've got Jalen Milroe. And at number 6, I've got Riley Leonard.
Interesting. All right. At number 4, I've got quarterback Jalen Milroe, and that's it for this tier. So we both have Milroe in there. You had Milroe when we first started talking about this class. I think you had him mocked in your Dynasty mock draft early on. He was a guy you were really excited about. He's kind of taken a tumble since. Thoughts on Milroe?
Yeah, I still like Milroe, but this is also why I kind of bumped Shuck up a tier, was just because I kind of wanted this tier to be the athletic guys with the rushing upside. And, both Milroe and Riley Leonard fit that bill. So that's why I also was another reason I moved Shuck up. But in terms of Jalen Milroe, part of it's going to be landing spot for him. I'm still excited about him in terms of his athleticism still there. Obviously, he showed it off with the combine he was able to run. It's just a matter of, for him and even Riley Leonard, just can they improve their accuracy enough and be more consistent passers to really have that chance to play and show their athleticism off.
Yeah, for me, why I have Milroe as a tier 3 guy, not with those tier 2 players with Sanders and Dart. He's an athlete.
Yeah,
pure and simple. 6'2", 217, redshirt junior. His hand size, is a little smaller. I know you don't necessarily care about that as much. Some teams do. I mean, he had a lot of fumbles, which would be
it's a knock with Cam Ward as well.
No, that's true. But if you look at him, Milrose has a huge arm, and he's a great dual threat quarterback. I mean, the rushing upside is just off the charts. He had 20 rushing touchdowns. Now, I think he'll probably be redshirted because I think he'll need some time to develop. But I think of a guy like Anthony Richardson, who was, a lot bigger. He basically was, I don't know if he was faster. I don't remember that. But, he was like just a specimen that you built in a lab. And people were so excited about him winning the top 3. If Jalen Milroe was like 2 inches taller and maybe a little bit larger frame, we're probably talking the same thing all over again, to be all honest with you. This is where the landing spot to me is going to really, really matter.
Yeah.
He's going to have to go somewhere where they're going to be patient with him, that he can redshirt a year, and hopefully they have an offensive-minded head coach that could really kind of get the best out of him. That to me is, we talk about landing spot being important. He's one of the guys for me that, like, I would love. And I think it was even my Dan Orlovsky talking about this. I couldn't agree with him more. If he went to the New York Giants, I think it'd be a great place to go because you've got Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson ahead of him, so you don't really have to play. But if things get kind of like rough in New York and they need a spark, bring in a guy like Milroe. You've got, Brian Daboll, who's got roots back to Alabama when he used to be there with Nick Saban. So he's some familiarity just back with that program, not necessarily with Jalen Milroe. You see what he was able to do with Josh Allen, who, had his accuracy issues, was able to bring that to life and really help him along. So to me, I think Milroe going there, I think you're looking at maybe a Russell Wilson type of thing where he was a later round pick, beat out a guy like Matt Flynn, who they signed as a veteran, and, ended up, the rest is history. So, needless to say, I think landing spot's going to be a big deal for Milroe.
Yeah. I mean, for a lot of these quarterbacks, right? I mean, that's going to be absolutely huge, the landing spot. But I don't know about the Giants. I think that's a really tough market, and I don't know if that's the right fit for Milroe there. And I think, Daboll gets a lot of credit for fixing Josh Allen, but Josh Allen also put in a lot of work, and, he went to a quarterback guru and fixed his mechanics. And I think that had a lot to do with, his improving his accuracy problems as much as, was having Daboll there as well.
I will tell you, I give you a lot of credit for putting Riley Leonard this high. I will be talking about him, and I have him higher than most. You probably have him the highest that I've seen. So I give you a lot of credit. I wanted to put him higher. It's just that, Yeah, I don't know. I'll talk
Look,
about it more.
I mean, we're talking about guys. Yes, they're
No, I
not
know.
perfect NFL prospects, but in terms of dynasty and fantasy, like these guys have the ultimate like ceilings because they're true dual threat quarterbacks. And I mean,
I don't
talking
know about
about
ultimate ceiling, but I mean, by having the dual threat quarterback,
oh, that's what I mean. I mean, yeah, I mean Riley Leonard had 17 rushing touchdowns this past year. And almost ran for 1,000 yards as well. So I mean, yeah, it was a big part of his game with Notre Dame, and I just with that upside, and if like I said, if him and Milrow can just fix their accuracy issues, that there's a chance that they're actually could sustain like an NFL career and a chance.
All right, so let's head over to tier number 4. Who do you got there?
All right, at number 7, I've got Will Howard, and at number 8, I got Kyle McCord.
At number 5, I've got Tyler Shook. At 6, I've got Kyle McCord. And 7, I've got Quinn Ewers. So starting to say some of the similar players here. This tier for me are going to be guys who are, more your pocket passers,
Yep.
who I think will more than likely be backups, but have maybe a possibility to turn it around. You talked about Sugar. I'll talk to him about him a little bit. He's the darling right now. A lot of draft people or topic shades of the world, those type are talking him up. I in watching some of the tape, I can see it. He has a huge arm. I just he's a 26-year-old rookie. He's had multiple season-long injuries, broken collarbones, broken fibula. I know it's not an ACL tear and Achilles or anything like that, but more than likely the guy's not going to be able to start right away. So now you're talking about he's going to be 27, 28 at that point. I don't really know if it's kind of like the Brandon Weeden effect, honestly, right? I mean, a guy from Cleveland who people were pretty excited about. I think he was in the second round of Oklahoma State, I want to say, and that never materialized. So again, I'm not saying he plays like Brandon Weeden, but all I'm saying is we've seen something like that in the past. Hasn't really, hasn't really worked out. And from a dynasty perspective, with his age plus the durability concerns, I did have him higher, but that ultimately was what didn't allow me to have him as high as you did.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes sense. I mean his injury, concerns is definitely a risk, and like you said, I mean the fact that like most likely, where he's going to get drafted. I mean he's not going to get a chance to start right away, so he'd have to rely on a starting quarterback getting injured or something like that.
How about a guy like Kyle McCord? You and I both have him in this tier. What was your thoughts around him? He obviously was night and day with what he was. People wanted him gone from Ohio State, and then he did wonders in Syracuse.
Yeah, even though like he got shunned from Ohio State, like he still had a really good season with Ohio State as well. And I mean, he was benefactor of having a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. on the team at Ohio State. But yeah, I think he's just a really solid quarterback, and he might just translate to more of a backup in the NFL. But again, he's your more of a pocket passer type, like you mentioned. But impressive. I mean, in terms of accuracy. He can push the ball down the field as well. So I do think he's an interesting prospect.
Yeah, I mean, he has a gunslinger mentality. But the problem with me, I mean, he led the NCAA with 4,779 passing yards. My problem with him is he's too turnover prone without enough upside. He just doesn't have enough juice, whether it's the dual threat ability, whether it's just, the decision making, what have you. To me, it's just too risky. You can't turn the ball over. In fantasy, it's negative 2 points. So what? But in an NFL team, that matters greatly. I just don't know if he'll ever get a shot. I think he's predominantly a backup, and at the end of the day, I just don't really see it coming together for him.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, yeah, I do think he factors more as a backup, and be surprised. There's not a lot of at the end of the day, there's not a lot of teams that need starting quarterbacks right now that would be taking a guy like Kyle McCord. So he's going to have to start off as a backup.
And then you had Will Howard in this tier as well.
Yeah.
What was your reasoning for that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think Will Howard and Kyle McCord are somewhat similar just because they have their own accuracy issues. I know Will Howard, can be late to read, lock in on one type of guy, which ultimately he's also another guy that's turnover prone, which is a knock on him. But he does have a bit more athleticism and a little bit more rushing side. He did have 7 rushing touchdowns. So that's why I ultimately, put him ahead of a guy like Kyle McCord.
Yeah, lastly for me, Quinn Ewers, I know you're not a big fan of his. A lot of people I don't think are, honestly. I just think at the end of the day, there's a reason why, and a lot of people don't really know why, looking back at it, other than he does have some, I think, good arm talent. But he was, number 1 overall, I believe, high school recruit coming out.
Yeah.
It just never really materialized. He's just been a disappointment. Now, he did deal with a shoulder injury, and he played through it. It didn't help. So, have we seen the best of him? I just we're at the bottom of the barrel here, right? I don't think any of
Yeah.
these guys, from a dynasty perspective, at least unless you're in a deep, deep league, these guys probably aren't even a consideration. If you're watching or listening right now, you might have just went on to the next podcast, right? Because I mean, a lot of these people
Well,
aren't
hope
all
you
that
stick around,
interesting.
Steve.
Well, no, we hope you're. Hey, if you're listening, we're glad you're listening. But, at the end of the day, honestly, you know me, I like to play for ceiling. Maybe a coach is able to untap that potential that he had coming into college football. And to me, that's why I just put him in there because I'm like, you know what? Here's a Hail Mary situation, and other players have done it before him, and I'm going to put him in this tier.
Yeah, I think the problem with him is he's just not consistent enough. Like you do see flashes, and there are certain games, like
Well,
the
against
Michigan.
Michigan,
I
that
was gonna,
Michigan game,
I
yeah.
was gonna say you took it right from me. That Michigan game, right? Everything was working, orchestrated the offense beautifully. But then there's other games where you just like you don't see that version out of him, and the Texas offense isn't running on all cylinders like it was in that game, and just I don't know. It's just interesting. So you do kind of get excited for when he does have games like that, but then for the most part, you watch him and I'm just like, I just feel he's lackluster.
All right, let's head over to tier number 5. Who do you got there to close it out?
Yeah, so at number 9, I've got Quinn Ewers, and at number 10, I've got Dylan Gabriel.
All right, so for me at number 8, I've got quarterback Riley Leonard. Then at 9, quarterback Dylan Gabriel. And then number 10, quarterback Will Howard. So kind of rounding out near the end here, you talked about Leonard a little earlier. I wanted to put him higher. He's 6'4", 216. My big thing against him is out of 36 starts, he only threw over 300 yards 3 times in his career.
Yeah.
That's not going to bode well for him. He's a project as a quarterback, but he's really, like you mentioned, he had 17 rushing touchdowns. He's a physical runner. I would love to see him as a backup to Josh Allen because in a way, he for
Right.
the Bills because he's a bruiser of a rushing quarterback. I just think at the end of the day, he's just too inconsistent. I do think that he could get drafted higher than people think, though. I don't, like you said, from a dynasty perspective, that running upside is going to be there. And if people can't be patient and be able to put an offense together, it's not a question. But I kind of view this as my project tier. Other than Will Howard, I just kind of stuck him at the end because I'm not necessarily a fan. But a guy like Dylan Gabriel too, to me, landing spot is so key with him. I know you and I talk about landing spot all the time, but he's 5'11", 205. The Bryce Young experiment, a roller coaster, has kind of scared me. So as a result, he's in that same boat, and he's not as dynamic as a Kyler Murray, being that short, or has that off-platform ability. That had like when you think of like a Bryce Young or even a Russell Wilson with his arms. So to me, it's like, okay, yes, he's second all time in passing yards in college football, but he's an
Yeah.
older rookie. He's 25 years old, and he has physical limitations. So to me, he's got to go. That my best case scenario is like the Brock Purdy effect. He goes
Right.
somewhere like that, and he's in a great system, and everything kind of comes together. I could see that happening for him, so it's not out of the question. It's just landing spot's going to matter a lot, and I kind of view him as a project just because of his limitations. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do definitely agree with you in the sense that he does have to go to the right system, and landing spot's going to be huge. And I mean, it's going to be huge for a lot of these guys, right? But I don't know if necessarily Gabriel's a quote unquote project. I mean, yes, he's a smaller guy, which is a knack on him. But I mean, if he goes to the right system, I think he'd be all right. And he's shown that he, is able to take over the football. Only his most amount of interceptions he's had in his career is 7. And being that he is, an older rookie, he's an experienced guy. And typically we see the guys that play more college football are more ready to go in the NFL when they do get the chance.
Yeah, I guess when I say project, I mean to say that the player has limitations that would make it so that the player can't kind of be a reliable starter. But you're not wrong. Project is usually like
Yeah,
this
I mean,
guy's
like I
not
think
a
Anthony Richardson type guy,
right.
or
Yeah,
like the
exactly.
Jason Milrose of the world,
Yeah, they're
Rocky nerds,
projects.
they're projects to
Right.
me.
Yeah, you're right. I probably shouldn't use
Or
that
like
term, but
Gabriel to me is a more polished quarterback. You're right, and
no, you're
from an
not wrong.
athleticism standpoint, he is very limited.
My concern is always like a Chase Daniel type who just goes from team to team to team to team when he's just
Right.
carrying the clipboard.
Yeah.
That's my concern with him.
Yeah, and it could happen, for some of these guys that we talked about. Even a guy like Kyle McCord, that could have that type of future as well.
Well, and I think Will Howard's going to be carrying the clipboard as well.
Oh
At the
boy,
end of the I just look. I mean,
or Will.
he transferred from Kansas State, went to Ohio State. I think there's going to be some postseason bias with him, right? I understand he led Ohio State to winning the national championship, which hey, it's always impressive. Only one team can win it at the end of the day, but like you said, he sails throws. He doesn't do well under pressure. He's not a dual threat quarterback. He can't push the ball downfield. And not to mention the team was absolutely stacked in Ohio State. And how much did that benefit him? So I don't know. To me, I know some people like him more than I do, but he doesn't excite me very much. Now, again, this is a caveat here. We are talking about this before the 2025 NFL draft. So when we start seeing, these draft picks and where these guys go, it's a completely different story. What if a guy like Tyler Shook is on everybody's medical and he goes undrafted? Well, then, you and I are basically saying that, okay, we might want to drop this guy a few tiers here, right? I mean, we just don't know how these teams are going to perceive these players.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, like Will Howard, I mean, he's got a chance. I mean, he's 6'4", 235. He's got the good NFL size. You do see him make throws. I mean, heck, even in that, the national championship game, or even in the college football playoff. Like I know he had extreme good talent, guys like Jeremiah Smith, but I mean, some of those throws in the placement are just right on the money and hitting those guys right in stride. So, but then there's the times where, yeah, he throws pick sixes. He threw one in Penn State, one against Michigan, and he has those head scratching plays. But there are some interesting plays, and I think he's got, a decent enough arm to play in the NFL.
So that does it for this episode. Just so happens that for both Joe and I, we had the same top 10 quarterbacks, just had them in a little bit of a different order. But at the end of the day, the draft is not that far away. We're talking about almost 3 weeks away. We're going to start to see where these players go. It's a combination of talent and landing spot coming together. So we get to see, kind of evaluate what we think of these guys prior to looking at their talent, and then kind of marrying that together with what happens with where they go. I know you and I are very excited about it, Joe. And as if you're, tuning into this, I'm sure you're as excited as well. If you haven't already, check it out. Check our most recent episode out where we did a Superflex IDP mock draft based off of Chad Reuter's NFL mock draft. So we went through with those landing spots. You want to go check that out. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.